What are the client side and server side? You must have observed that if you talk about any program or a role of the developer, it has to be identified that that particular developer develops what, whether the developer is working on client side and whether the developer is working on the server side. So when we talk about this term client side or the server side, basically both are the web development terms that describe where the application code runs. Being a developer, there is a distinction between front end and the back end. Although the client side and server side of front end back end, they are not quite same. If you talk about a serverless architecture, the serverless vendor host and assign resources to all server side process, and process scale up as application uses increase. So even though it is serverless, but still the allocation of the resources should be identified and define the functions which are related to the client side and the server side process. What is the client server model? The client server model consists of the user devices which can communicate through network with centrally located server, make sure the data communication is there. End user devices such as laptop, smartphone, desktop, they consider to be client of the server as they were customer obtaining service from the company. Client devices send requests to the server for web page or application, and the server serve up the responses. We understand this from an example. For example, if you want to search any website, what you do? You put the domain name, right? And you just click on search. In that case, the system that you are using, that becomes the client, and the domain that you are searching on the internet and from where it is fetched, that data, that become a server side. So in client server model is used because the servers are typically more powerful, more reliable than user device, and they also are constantly maintained and kept in controlled environment to make sure they are always on and available. This is very important. You are not going to visit that website which is down all the time, right? And even though if you are using an e-commerce site, you don't want to visit that site which is not available all the time. So the importance of the server here is that server should be functioning all the time, 24/7. Although individual servers may go down, there are usually other servers backing them up. Meanwhile, users can turn their device on and off, or lose or break their devices, and it should not impact the internet service for other users. And that is why this client server model is very important. The servers can serve multiple client devices at once, and each client device sends requests to multiple servers in the course of accessing and browsing the internet. It doesn't matter whether client devices is working or not. Whichever device client would like to use, the server should be available 24/7 and should be available to the users. What is client side scripting and what is server side scripting? So if you talk about the script, the client side scripting means running scripts such as JavaScript on the client device. Usually within a browser, all kinds of script can run on a client side if they are written in JavaScript, because JavaScript is universally supported, and other scripting language can only be used if the user's browser supports them. But the server side scripts run on a server instead of the client. Often, in order to deliver dynamic content to web pages, in response to user actions. Server-side script don't have to be written in JavaScript, since the server may support a variety of language. So this is the basic difference between client-side scripting and the server-side scripting. How do the server-side process work in a serverless architecture? When we talk about the serverless architecture, which means all the server-side or backend process is still run on server instead of client device. So all the process is happening on the server side. There is no process which require the client devices, but they are not deployed on any specific server or set of servers. Backend process are broken up into the different multiple functions which run on demand and scale up automatically. Developers can still build all the functionality that normally runs server side within a serverless architecture. So when we talk about the server side process work in serverless architecture, it has to be decided and identify in the backend that all the smallest functions are broken and they work as the demand basis. Server-side programming. What is server-side programming? It is a program that runs on server dealing with the generation of the content of the web page, such as querying of the database, operations over database, access, write a file on a server, interact with other servers, structure web applications, and process user input. For example, if user input is a text in search box, run a search algorithm on data stored on a server and send the result. And this is how the process happens when you would like to search anything on the web browser. There are a few examples. The programming languages for server-side programmings which are identified: PHP, C++, Java and JSP, Python, Ruby on Rails. So these are the programming language which are used on the server-side programming. So if you have interest to work on server-side programming, then you should know any of these programming language to work on server side. So that's it for the day. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture. Thank you. Client-side programming. It is a program which runs on client machine or a browser that deals with user interface, display, or any other processing that can happen on client machine, such as reading, writing, cookies. Client-side programming interact with temporary storage. It make interactive web pages. It interact with local storage. It send request for data to server. It send request to server, and it also work as an interface between server and user. So in client-side programming, it is very important to understand that in server-side programming, all the processes are happening on server side. In client-side programming, all the processes are happening on the client side. So if the process is happening, it means the space or the storage, the processor, all these services are happening on the local machine. The programming languages for the client-side programming are JavaScript, VBScript, HTML, CSS, or Ajax. If you are interested to work on the client-side programming language, you should know any of the one language which I just mentioned to work on as a client or side or front end.